just antennas, it's a little bit on mobile installation and so forth. Anyone here it does HF mobile? You do. And maybe you could share some of your experiences because this could be an interesting, interesting episode. Just a little bit of history. John so graciously said I have some experience. Got quite a few years experience in the mobile communication. Got a couple years on Long Island Sound doing marine installation, both pleasure boats and commercial. Did a lot of work with New Haven towing under tugs. Got several years on the Gulf of Mexico in fishing fleets and the shrimping fleets of doing, this is all back when it was all HF. Got several years working for in between semesters of school in Florida, working for a guy who had, or a company who had the contract on a military base for the tugs and all this sort of stuff that tows all the things, the airplanes around and fire departments and so forth. Plus he had a commercial account in town that probably had about 5 clients, that probably about 300 mobile units. And we also had an MCC system. Does anyone know what an MCC system is? That is the predecessor to a repeater. They called it multiple common carrier. But like they have experience both in the high band range, which is in the 170 range, and in the low band, which is around 48 megahertz, which is where the police used to be. And then I've got also 5 years, about 5 years experience in doing aircraft installations. And at one time, I had an FAA certification to do installations. I flew for a guy at Danbury I'd get down to Texas and bring airplanes back that were bare bones, bring them in, we'd tear them all apart and do installations that had to be done according to the FAA regs, according to drawings and diagrams and so forth. So I've been down that road, plus a lot of handwork. So just a little bit of history. And so just to start off with, here's kind of a HF mobile installation to start off with. And kind of interesting.
What's that license say?
I found this on the web. It's N4UJW. I thought that was kind of neat.
That's cute.
And then here's a few comments to start. In a mobile installation, if you've done any of it, first of all, you're always at a disadvantage because of the 12-volt system. And you really have no practical way of making a long antenna to be mobile. To be portable, but not mobile. And there's no way almost to get antenna gain, but I'll explain that a little bit. So what are your options? Cut your losses. Okay? Bigger is better. And bigger is in antennas, in wires, fuse blocks, which I'll go a little bit through here. Here's another option. You can have a little generator and a big aerial if you'd like. Practical, not really, but portable. A little bit of history. John maybe appreciate this. And up the left-hand kind is Gonset. Gonset was a company who built a little converter. This was a 3-band, I think it was 80 and 75 and 40 and 20 meters, which converted down to a broadcast radio. And you use your broadcast radio as your ham receiver. And the transmitter could be an ARC-5 or whatever we talked about. On the right-hand side is a Heathkit, which some people may recognize. Here's some LMAC. This is an AF68 and a PMR8. I have both of those, plus I have an AF67 and a PMR7. The difference, this one went from 80 meters to 6 meters. The AF67 went from 160 to 10 meters. Here was the power supply that ran this rig. Some other manufacturers, SBE, Sideband Engineers, Collins, Hallicrafter, Hammerlin, EBC. EBC is a company that was down in New Rochelle, Morrow. And here's another interesting thing. Fred can expound on this one. Transcon is here in Stamford. They built a 10-meter and a 6-meter little converter. It was a transmitter and a converter all built into a little box that would work into your car radio. Fred might talk about that. I think it's down in very close to where your shop is, isn't it?
Building next door to where my shop.
Yeah, it was called Transcon. Power supplies. Well, that's obvious. There's a dynamotor, very inefficient, but it made electricity. Here's a vibrator supply, both 6 and 12
Did you use
volts.
the dynamotor for your AF-57 in the car?
No, I did not. I did, oh no, prior to the AF-67, I used the dynamotor, but then I went to a vibrator supply, and then this is a solid-state switcher, which is actually Heathkit. You can see the conglomeration you had to use in order to get mobile stuff up and running. Here's some modern rigs, which you can probably recognize. There's a 706, there's a 7000. This was a Yaesu at 897, I guess, or whatever it is. I've forgotten whose that is, but those are some of the modern ones that are up and running in the mobile world. And here's everyone's dream. Okay, if you read this thing, 17 foot 10 inches. Play hell trying to go under bridges, but so be it. It has its issues, which I'll explain a little bit later, but this is a 17 foot antenna. And if anybody's interested, I can give you the website where I found this. Here's a basic system of installation. I have one of these, an ANC4, which is a neat device, and there's a picture of it. Because I have a Mazda pickup truck. It's got an electric fuel pump in a plastic tank. Well, there ain't no shielding. So I did some experimenting with it and was 30 feet away with another mobile receiver, and I could get an S7 signal from the fuel pump, 30 feet away. So needless to say, what does that do in a mobile installation? Well, I found one of these things, and basically what this is an RF bridge. What I did is that sense antenna, I took a wire through the bottom of the car and in the truck, and I put it and I taped it on the bottom of the fuel tank. The fact that the fuel pump is of a constant RPM, hence constant frequency, you can do something with it. And then you have your regular signal which is receiving the same thing. And in what this does, you have a phase. It has a frequency adjust. It has 2 bands. This will go from about 160 meters up to about 60 megahertz. You can adjust sensitivity. You can adjust phase. And you can get about 40 dB of rejection. Without this, I cannot run mobile. With it, I can null this out where I won't hear the fuel pump. And then the radio, of course, can be whatever, and I have a clear speech. So just in dollar-wise, that's about $200, and that's about $200. Interesting, though, this month's QST magazine, if anyone gets it, there's someone who has come up with a DSP speaker system from some little company in England. What it costs, I don't know. But this is what I have in my vehicle, and consequently, it works very well. Here's an interesting one. Lighter plug, radio, mag mount. In the VHF world, that works. In the HF world, and I'll explain why that doesn't work. It's really a no-no in the HF world. Here we can get into some wiring. I made the mistake when I wired I have a 706 in my truck, and I used the existing ICOM wire harness, which happens to be number 12 wire, which was a mistake. If I were to do it over again, I would go a minimum of number 10, preferably number 8. And if you look at the reasons why, you can see. If you look at voltage drop of number 12 with the pulling 20 amps on a 12-foot run, you kind of got those numbers, and then number 10 is there, and then number 8 is there. And the difference here doesn't seem much, but that little bit makes a big, big difference in power output on an HF radio. Okay. Now, and also take into account fuse blocks and connectors. The connectors, the barrel type connectors, which are very, very common in the HF and radio world, are terrible. They get hot at high current. You can get a half a volt drop across a fuse. The other thing that's very typical in modern radios is to use the equivalent of Molex connectors. There again, they're terrible. The power poles is where you really want to go. And I had a problem with my radio for a month trying to figure it out. Take it out, put it on the bench, check it out, put it back in. It would quit. Turned out that the Molex connector on the back of the 706, I had to take a pin and slash the connectors down to look like a good connection to finally get the thing to be reliable. They're awful. So, and if you notice K3 or Electcraft and a few of the other newer ones are using the Anderson power poles for connections, and that's one of the reasons.
And it just gets loose?
Just
and
gets loose,
vibrates?
it gets hot, and the metal, I mean, they're cheap, they're really cheap, and what happens is if you've got a pin that's an eighth of an inch in diameter, and you've got a thing that it goes into that's an eighth minus 10 thousandths, no problem, but eventually it's split and it'll open it up and it'll drive you crazy. Rich, who's a good friend of mine, K10F, has a 706, and we were talking one day, and I said, gee, that radio sounds terrible. So he says, what do you mean? So he started his car, and the problem went away. Went down and felt the connector, and the connector was hot, almost that he couldn't touch it because of voltage, of power problems with the mechanical
I
connector.
had the same problem with my 706 as well, like yours.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I wrote a little doo-wop thing to QST, and they did publish it, and I've gotten many comments that many people had the same problem. So that's a little bit on wiring installation. The physical location of where you're going to operate, that's certainly up to you. One of the problems, of course, is new automobiles are all plastic. How do you mount antennas? The idea is to get the antenna as high as possible, get as much metal under it as you can, and I've seen all kinds of installations that are, it's just a problem. Here's a little chart. This is current in amps, length, and wire size. So 15 feet probably is about nominal in a standard automobile. 20 amps is the higher end of what you draw. If you do the correlation, you see it's about number 10 wire. I would go to number 8 because the incremental cost is a little is trivial, but it does make a difference. I consider my truck without the engine running and be operating a sideband, and somebody will tell me that my audio is distorted. Start the thing up and get another volt, problem goes away. So it's that's why I mentioned earlier, 12 volts you're already at disadvantage. And people running amplifiers, these 500 watt amplifiers that are pulling 80 amps off, I mean, how do you do that? Not easily. There's an ideal fuse block. This comes from the marine world. It's made by Blue Sea. And if you notice this number, 0.0003 ohms, with a maxi fuse in it, I got that number because I measured it. I have a million, or actually a micro ohm meter available to me that I actually measured the resistance of that fuse block, actually this picture of it, and that's what I got. And so rather than using the barrel fuses and so forth, this is really by far the better way to go. And it's strictly for disaster, of course. I use a 30 amp fuse in it, and that'll go up to about 80 amps.
So we can, where can we buy these?
West Marine. I kind of do my installations like you do it in the marine world with stainless hardware and so forth, and then you don't worry about corrosion and all that stuff. And stainless is pretty lossy, but at HF it's a non-problem. Grounds. You can read various things that people use straps for grounds. There's a little interesting thing. Think about it, that a 4 to 5 foot long strap is a perfect 6 meter antenna. So inches, not feet. Remember the Everyone's Dream slide? Guy had 5 foot straps on the top of it. Unfortunately, I had other pictures, and I was going to mention that I don't have, I lost them because I was supposed to do this presentation last fall. And Fred called me a couple weeks ago, and I looked around and I got what I could get. So unfortunately, I don't have the picture of that, but I could point you, if you're interested, point you to that website. And the commercials, I'll go into some commercial antennas and so forth, but more on grounds, RF grounds, various ways of connecting things by getting, if you've got an RFI problem in a car, putting toroids on it, that's not the way to fix it. You got to figure out what the hell's going on. And particularly in the HF world, you got 100 watts of RF floating everywhere. So getting good grounds and everything common together is like I know 706s, they'll come apart with an extension cable. When people put ferrites on them and it bothers the computers in the vehicles and so forth, that's because there's a mismatch somewhere. I run my 706 with the extension cable. I've been running it Mobile now 8 years, and I have no trouble with it. Here's a poor installation where this is a trailer hitch that they, I don't know what the hell they call them, you people, campers probably know, and get this big extension thing and put the antenna and they get a ground strap and hook it. Believe me, that is not the way to go. There's more loss in that than you could ever believe. This was to get into what you originally talked about the antenna system. Rich, K10F, and myself, well, he sort of got it started, and we started playing around HF, particularly on 60 meters. And Hustler makes a 60-meter loading coil. And he said, you know, I have one that has a problem with it. I had a brand new one in my truck that I had bought from Lentini, not even unpacked. And I split it apart and went in his basement, and we got an ohm meter and checked mine, and it had the same problem. The construction of it is it's got the helical wound end caps and so forth, and it's brass, but it's coated with some, I don't know, shiny whatever it is, and they use a rivet to connect the wire. Well, that's not a good RF connection. So that started us, and I got a picture here. I can show you both of the resonators, how we repaired them. So this got us started on doing some things. Joel, W1ZR, who's the technical editor for QST, got interested, and he said, gee, why don't we do some comparisons? So we started, we got a whole bunch of antennas together, and I got a picture of it a little bit later. I'll show you what we used. And the whole operation was to take this antenna and measure, forgetting about the installation in the mobile, antenna for antenna. So Rich at the time had a microwatt meter which was calibrated in dBm, which was very, very accurate. Basically it was a bolometer, and it went from DC to 20 gigahertz. So in this world it was no problem. So what we did is we went down to Campo Beach in Westport. Oh, yeah. We went down to Campo Beach in Westport and started with Joel as the sort of the referee of this. And we did measurement for measurement and actually measured the efficiency of this antenna to this one, this one to this one, this one to this one. And what we found is that the helical type are less efficient than the Hustler below 20 meters. And if you look at a Hustler, the inductor is maybe 1.5 inches to it, depending on what band you're on. And the helicals are just wound wire, and those, they don't work as well. You get above 20 meters, the construction of them looks about the same, and hence you couldn't really tell the difference between those antennas. But what the whole test was to find out how well these antennas performed compared to a screwdriver. So we borrowed well, you see the picture of it, you can judge whose it is. And we started doing efficiency measurements of antennas against the screwdriver. And this is the antennas that we used. Various types of helical wound. Here's the screwdriver that we used. You notice this one and this one, these are the 60-meter resonators that we actually took apart and had to solder the wires in here. So we did all kinds of comparison against the screwdriver, and in any test did this screwdriver even come close to the performance of any of these antennas. It was terrible. So that got us thinking. So what happened was Joel went back to the league, and we actually published that article, which I can give you a little couple pages on. So he went back to the league and explained what we had done, and they said, gee, maybe we ought to do some comparisons of screwdrivers. So the league went out and bought 10 different types of screwdriver antennas, ranging from about $129 up to $1,200. And we did comparisons on those 10 antennas compared to each other, found the difference between those from the worster to the betterer, and in no way did any of those even perform to the performance that we got out of the standard Hustlers. So does that say you shouldn't buy a screwdriver antenna? Not really, because it could be that's you like the convenience of it and so forth. Trying to operate, and as I mentioned down here, If you want to operate mobile, if you expect to do the same thing you can in your ham shack with beam antennas and long wires and so forth, that's tough. So what I found is that to select a couple of bands. My experience has been that for general, 40 meters is tough because they got the e-cars and they got all the nets going, and so to have a mobile, a little tough. 60 meters opened up, that's a great band. It's 200 to 300 miles during the day. Great bunch of people on it. There are five channels, upper sideband, work very well. Great people, interesting group that you can get. The other band that I operate is 17, because there's no contesting. Very seldom do you hear anybody on with kilowatt amplifiers. And also, if a mobile comes up on 17, generally, if they hear you, they'll break over to try to work the mobile. I've made some very, very nice contacts on 17. The best DX that I got mobile was I was living in Wilton and driving to Stanford to work. I was on the back roads of Wilton, and I talked to a guy on Maui, mobile. I mean, I've heard Australia. I've never been able to work with BKs. Worked all over Europe. Worked all into South America, no problem. The best DX I got mobile is on Maui, which I thought was. And the guy gave me, I don't know, an S6 or an S7 report, which is, in mobile is great. Here's a kind of an antenna, a loading coil that's I found on the web that a guy built. That's coax and copper tubing. There's a few other ones that he's come up with for changing bands. Again, they're single band devices, but again, to get the efficiency, to use a screwdriver against something like this, there's just no comparison.
So if you want to change band, you're physically
Physically
unscrewing,
unscrew the thing and so
removing
forth.
it, putting.
That's why I'm saying that if you decide you're going to go mobile, select the bands that you're particularly interested in, and trying to break a kilowatt round table on 20 meters where a guy's got to